Welcome back to our Unboxed. Today we are revisiting the battle between the previous generation sensible high-end GPUs. And those of course being the Radeon RX 6800 XT and the GeForce RTX 3080 10GB. And we'll be doing so in 50 games at 1440p and 4K. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LGA 1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so before we get into the blue bar graphs, a quick refresher on the battle to date. Back in early 2021, I compared the RTX 3080 and 6800 XT in 30 games, benchmarked at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. And I found that at 1080p, the 6800 XT was an average 5% faster. Then I found identical performance at 1440p, and then the 6800 XT was 6% slower at 4K. Then in 2022, I retested with 50 games and found the RTX 3080 to be 3% slower at 1080p, 1% faster at 1440p, and then 7% faster at 4K. So fairly similar margins to the 2021 test, with performance overall much the same between the two GPUs. That said, both comparisons did come with a few caveats. For example, if you're interested in ray tracing performance, then the RTX 3080 was generally much faster than what the averages would suggest. The NVIDIA GPU also enjoys support for superior upscaling tech and DLSS, but the 6800 XT packs more VRAM, though to date the RTX 3080 has gotten away almost unscathed with its 10GB frame buffer. This 2023 comparison will still include 50 games, but this time there are many more ray tracing configurations included, so that should swing things more in the favor of the RTX 3080, though I will also make a comparison using just the rasterized data for those of you who are not interested in ray tracing performance. I've also done some exploration into VRAM usage on the RTX 3080, and we'll get into that towards the end of the video. Now I should just quickly note that this video isn't intended as a buying guide, rather the point is to revisit and see how each product has aged. That said, if you were in the market for either of these products today, it has to be said that the 6800 XT looks to be a lot better in terms of value at around $530 US, whereas RTX 3080s are more like $700, some $800 plus if you want one from a more reputable brand. Therefore, that means at minimum you are looking at spending just over 30% more for the RTX 3080, and it's simply not worth that premium. By the way, in case you've forgotten, the MSRP for the RTX 3080 is $700 US, whereas the 6800 XT's MSRP is $650 US, so a small discount there on the Radeon GPU, but didn't make a big difference back in the day. But what it does mean is that the 6800 XT is well below MSRP, whereas the RTX 3080 is still priced at or above its original MSRP. And it's crazy to note that when I last compared these two GPUs in early 2022, both were priced well above $1,000 US, and were in fact around $1,200 US, so things have certainly improved since the cryptocurrency crash, though I think it is fair to say the GPU market has never fully recovered, and if AMD and NVIDIA get their way, it never will. So I suppose keep that in mind, gamers. Anyway, for testing, the CPU used is the Ryzen 9 7950X 3D, but with the second CCD disabled, and this has been done to ensure maximum performance in all games. This CPU has been tested on the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master, using 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, and as usual we'll go over the data for around a dozen other titles tested before jumping into the big breakdown graphs. And the resolutions of interest here are 1440p and 4K, so let's get into it. First up, we have Cyberpunk 2077 using the high preset with ray tracing disabled, and as you can see, performance between these two GPUs is basically identical. The RTX 3080, it's 2% faster at 1440p and 5% faster at 4K, so basically we are looking at just a few frames difference at each tester resolution. However, if we enable ray tracing, the RTX 3080 does find itself comfortably ahead, rendering 47% more frames at 1440p and 57% more at 4K, both of which are massive wins. That said, I'd only consider the 1440p data as relevant, as the 3080 was good for 66 FPS on average, which I'd say is highly playable. Also, please note that while FSR2 was used here, scaling with DLSS is identical using the RTX 3080. Dying Light 2 is another title that has been tested with and without ray tracing enabled, and first up we have the high quality preset, which doesn't use ray tracing and it forces the DirectX 11 API. Here we found that performance between these two GPUs is identical. The 6800 XT, for example, was just 2% faster at 1440p, and then both rendered 49 FPS at 4K. Then, as we found in Cyberpunk 2077, enabling ray tracing hands the RTX 3080 a huge performance advantage thanks to its more mature RT support. Here the 3080 was 48% faster at 1440p and then 52% faster at 4K. And again, it's only the 1440p data that I'd say is valid here, as the RTX 3080 was good for 68 FPS, which is very playable. I think when all's said and done, it basically boils down to the fact that you wouldn't enable RT in this title with an RX 6800 XT. Next up, we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and this title favours the Radeon GPU, allowing the 6800 XT to deliver 17% more frames at 1440p, and then 8% more at 4K when using the ultra quality preset. And as we found in the past, scaling is much the same using lower quality presets, such as Basic for example. A Plague Tale Requiem was also tested using the ultra quality preset, and here performance is much the same between these two GPUs. The RTX 3080 was a few frames faster at each tested resolution, but overall, performance and of course the gaming experience was much the same. As a side note, I went back and checked out the ray tracing performance to see if it worked on the RTX 3080's 10GB frame buffer, and found the game does use 9.6GB at 1440p, and it played at 60 to 70 FPS, but 4K was too much, requiring 13GB, and this resulted in constant stuttering on the 3080. That said though, this was of no real consequence, at least for this matchup, as the 6800 XT just didn't have enough power to render playable frame rates despite having enough VRAM. Next up we have Total War Warhammer 3, and this has never been a good title for the Radeon GPUs. Here the RTX 3080 was 14% faster at 1440p and 23% faster at 4K, both of which are quite substantial margins and clear wins for the GeForce GPU. The 4K performance was particularly noticeable as the RTX 3080 delivers a reasonable experience here, whereas the 44 FPS on average from the 6800 XT, it did feel very laggy. Moving on to the Calisto Protocol, we find that at 1440p the RTX 3080 is 7% faster, and then 9% faster at 4K. So not massive margins here over the 6800 XT, but the GeForce GPU was clearly faster at both tested resolutions. One of the newest games included in our 50 game benchmark is Atomic Heart, and here the 6800 XT and RTX 3080 are very evenly matched, with the GeForce GPU just nudging ahead by a frame or two. Next up we have Fortnite, and we'll start with the DirectX 11 mode, which does generally deliver the best results if you're not heavily CPU limited. The game's performance mode, for example, also uses the DX11 API. And under these conditions, the 6800 XT was 10% faster at 1440p and then just 6% faster at 4K, though the 1% lows were almost 30% greater. Switching to DirectX 12 reduces performance, and now the RTX 3080 is 10% faster at 1440p and 15% faster at 4K. Then with hardware ray tracing enabled, NANITE and LUMEN, the RTX 3080 was 9% faster at 1440p and 38% faster at 4K, so both were reasonable at 1440p, while only the 3080 was usable at 4K. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, we find similar performance between these two GPUs at 1440p using the ultra quality preset. The RTX 3080 was consistently a few frames faster when comparing the average frame rate, but slower when looking at the 1% lows. Then, with ray tracing enabled, the RTX 3080 was 32% faster on average, and yet despite that, the 6800 XT delivered a smoother experience with less frame stutters, while at 4K the RTX 3080 was completely broken, and although the 6800 XT didn't suffer from frame stuttering, performance overall was poor, leading to an unplayable gaming experience with sub 30 FPS. The RTX 3080 managed to come out comfortably on top in our Halo Infinite testing, delivering 12% greater performance at 1440p and 16% at 4K. To be fair, both GPUs are exceptionally fast in this title using the ultra quality settings, but if you're after maximum performance, then the 3080 has it over the 6800 XT in this example. Forza Horizon 5 gives the nod to the 6800 XT at 1440p. Here the Radeon GPU was 15% faster, though it has to be said the 1% lows are very similar. Then at 4K we're looking at very comparable performance. 5% greater average frame rates from the 6800 XT, while 1% lows were 3% better for the RTX 3080. AMD does enjoy a win in Death Stranding, but like Halo, we find that frame rates are excessively high using either GPU, so the 6800 XT's 9% victory at 1440p isn't as significant as it would have been had frame rates been much lower. Then at 4K, we find the 6800 XT to be just 3% faster, so here performance is basically identical. The second last game I'm going to look at the results for is War Thunder, and here the RTX 3080 was 6% faster at 1440p and then oddly 10% slower at 4K. So some strange scaling behavior here, but overall with both GPUs pushing well past 200 FPS in this example, it doesn't really matter. Finally, we have the ever popular Counter-Strike Global Offensive results, and here both GPUs delivered basically identical performance at both tested resolutions. And please note, we're not using the workshop benchmark for this testing, instead I'm using a replay from a professional match, as it much more accurately represents actual gameplay performance. Okay, so we've just had a look at 14 of the 50 games tested, some with and some without ray tracing enabled, and now it's time to see how these two GPUs compared across all of the games tested. So let's go do that, starting with the 1440p data. In the past, we found performance between these two GPUs to be about the same, and that's certainly still true. But with many more ray tracing tests included, the 6800 XT is now 6% slower on average, and you can clearly see that the 8 worst examples here for AMD all had ray tracing enabled. Meanwhile, there were just 4 examples where the 6800 XT was faster than the RTX 3080 by a 10% margin or greater. Then, as you'd expect based on previous testing, we find that when increasing the resolution to 4K, this further favors the GeForce RTX 3080, and now the 6800 XT is 8% slower on average. The only real outlier here is Hogwarts Legacy, where the RTX 3080 does run out of VRAM, but the 6800 XT wasn't able to provide playable performance here either, so technically that result is, I suppose, null and void, and if we do remove it, the 6800 XT becomes 10% slower on average. Now, if we were to remove the ray tracing data from our 1440p results, we see that the 6800 XT is now just 2% slower than the RTX 3080, reducing the number of test configurations from 57 to 42. Then at 4K, we find the 6800 XT is 6% slower than the RTX 3080, with the only real outlier here being the Fortnite DirectX 12 performance. And this aligns perfectly with our 2021 data, which also found the 6800 XT to be 6% slower at 4K, and that dataset included very few ray tracing enabled configurations. Okay, so there you have it. For standard rasterization performance, the Radeon RX 6800 XT and GeForce RTX 3080 trade blows, though generally speaking the RTX 3080 still has the upper hand overall, but as we've found numerous times in the past with these big benchmarks, there really isn't that much in it. However, as we've also concluded since day one, if you are interested in or care at all about ray tracing performance, then the RTX 3080 was, and really still is, the obvious choice. As it stands, the 10GB frame buffer of the RTX 3080 is still just enough to get away with enabling ray tracing in all of the latest games. You can break performance in some instances, but it only takes small tweaks to get it working. Games where the 8GB RTX 3070 is completely broken, such as the Calisto Protocol at 1440p with ray tracing enabled, that worked just fine with the RTX 3080, as just shy of 9GB is required, and I found all textures loaded in Forspoken, for example, even at 4K using the ultra high preset, which does enable ray tracing by default. So the 10GB buffer is currently right on the edge with today's games. And this means, as it stands, the RTX 3080 is the superior choice for ray tracing, so in that sense, it has aged quite well, and certainly worlds better than the 3070/3070 Ti. Another feature that has aged well, really well in fact, is DLSS. The current state of DLSS support and quality is excellent. This is really the key benefit of GeForce GPUs, and we've been sure to make this known for quite some time now, basically ever since DLSS got good with its second iteration. So not a lot has changed from my previous 2 revisits. Last time out, I concluded that I felt it was very easy to argue in favor of the RTX 3080, given those features. So all of the stuff just mentioned. And I wrapped that video up by saying, in short, if you're keen to check out ray tracing and you think you'll play the latest titles with it enabled, a GeForce GPU really is a must, as performance is typically much better. I'd really only go for the 6800 XT if I wasn't interested in ray tracing and it was at least a few $100s cheaper, which it was just a few short weeks ago. That is at the time of making the previous comparison, I'll just note. And of course, pricing will likely vary in your region. So if the 6800 XT happens to be a good bit cheaper, then it will probably end up being the way to go. So that's what I concluded with in my 2022 revisit. And I think a lot of that is still true today. The RTX 3080 is technically the better product in my opinion, and was or is the better buy if both are available at the MSRP. So to put that another way, if you gave me the choice between the RTX 3080 and 6800 XT, so a free graphics card, I just had to pick one of them to use daily, I suppose, I would pick the RTX 3080. But if I had to buy one of them today, so the RTX 3080 for $700 US, well, probably more really, especially if you want from a brand like MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, and so on, or the 6800 XT for just over $500 US. Again, there are reputable brands selling for $530 US, I believe. Given that huge difference in price there, don't think that's worth the 30-something% premium, so I would pretty well buy a 6800 XT every time. Really good price at the moment. Of course, as I said, it's really all about pricing as to which one of these you pick. If they're priced closely together, then I'd get that one. But as it stands with current pricing and the way it's been for over a year now, this card gets the nod from me. And that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, then please do give it a thumbs up. It was a ton of work. And if you are a Floatplane or Patreon member, then you'll be able to grab all 57-ish graphs. There's more than that, but you better grab all of the graphs, not just see the summary in the video. That's all the good stuff. But if you want to dig in and see individual results for individual games, then you can do that as a Floatplane or Patreon member. You'll also get access to a heap of other cool stuff. We have an exclusive Discord server for members only, monthly live stream, members only live stream. Tim and I get together and do that, answer your questions live, behind the scenes content, Q&As, a lot of cool stuff there. So if you're interested, check out our Floatplane or Patreon account, sign up, get access to all that good stuff. But if you're not interested, of course, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.